In the realm of Eridor, magic isn't just a mystical force, it's a visible extension of the soul, a shadow that dances and writhes, revealing one's power and potential. Princess Elira, however, casts no shadow. Deemed magically barren, she is a political pawn in a dangerous game, betrothed to the formidable Lord Dravik, whose shadow is as vast and terrifying as the legends that surround him. This is not a love story, but a pact forged in desperation, a desperate attempt to maintain power, and for Elira to survive. But when shadows shift and secrets are revealed, their alliance becomes a crucible, forging a connection neither expected, and a love that could either save their kingdom or shatter it completely. Chapter 1. The Shadowless Bride. The chill of the Eridorian winter seemed to seep into Elira's very bones, mirroring the icy dread that had taken root in her heart. The great hall, usually a place of vibrant tapestries and echoing laughter, felt like a mausoleum tonight. The heavy velvet of her gown, a deep midnight blue embroidered with silver thread meant to mimic the constellations, felt more like a shroud. Every eye in the hall was on her, or rather, at her, searching, probing, confirming the rumors that had haunted her since childhood. She cast no shadow. In Eridor, where magic manifested as a visible extension of one's soul, her lack of a shadow was not merely an anomaly, it was an abomination. It whispered of emptiness, of a void where power should reside. It made her a pariah, a princess in name only, a liability to her family. Her gaze drifted towards the raised dais where her father, King Theron, sat. His face, normally etched with a jovial warmth, was a mask of strained composure. Beside him, Queen Lyra's expression was even colder, her usual regal grace replaced by a barely concealed distaste. Elira knew what they saw when they looked at her. Not their daughter, but a broken tool, a pawn to be sacrificed for the good of the kingdom. The heavy oak doors at the far end of the hall creaked open, and a hush fell over the assembled nobles. A figure emerged, tall and imposing, his presence immediately commanding the room's attention. Lord Dravik. Even from this distance, Elira could feel the weight of his power, a palpable pressure that made the air thrum. He strode forward, his boots echoing on the polished stone floor. His shadow, unlike any other in Eridor, preceded him, a vast, inky pool that swallowed the light, stretching and swirling as if it possessed a life of its own. It was a terrifying spectacle, a testament to the legendary power that had earned him the moniker Shadow Lord. He was a weapon, honed and dangerous, and tonight, he was to be her husband. Elira forced herself to meet his gaze as he approached. His eyes were a startling shade of blue, sharp and piercing, like shards of ice. They held no warmth, no hint of the compassion she desperately craved. His face was handsome, in a severe, sculpted way, but his expression was unreadable, a carefully constructed mask that hid whatever emotions churned beneath. He stopped before the dais, bowing low to her father. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in Elira's chest. "I am honored to accept your generous offer." Generous. The word felt like a slap. It was anything but. This was a transaction, a cold, calculated exchange of power. Dravik gained legitimacy, a direct link to the royal line, bolstering his already formidable influence. And she gained a reprieve, a stay of execution, disguised as a marriage. King Theron rose, his voice booming through the hall. "Lord Dravik, your loyalty to Eridor is unquestioned. Your strength is a shield against our enemies. It is with great satisfaction that we offer you the hand of our daughter, Princess Elira, in marriage." Elira flinched internally at the forced tone in her father's voice. He couldn't even pretend to be happy about this. Dravik turned to her, his gaze sweeping over her with a detached scrutiny that made her skin crawl. She felt like an insect under a magnifying glass, her every flaw exposed. "Princess Elira," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "I trust you understand the terms of this arrangement." She met his gaze steadily, forcing a semblance of composure she didn't feel. "I do, Lord Dravik." I am to be your wife in name only. A symbol, a means to an end, a flicker of something surprise, respect, crossed his face, quickly vanishing behind his usual impassivity. Indeed, sentimentality has no place in matters of state. Iliara's heart clenched. She had known this, expected this, but hearing it spoken aloud, so coldly, so definitively, was a fresh wound. She was not a woman to be cherished, but a piece on a chessboard, moved and manipulated for the sake of power. She lowered her head slightly, then let the ceremony proceed. The sooner Eridor shows solidarity, the stronger we will be, she stated in a clear voice, projecting as much confidence as she could muster, though her insides twisted. The ceremony itself was a blur. The words of the high priest washed over her, meaningless and hollow. The weight of the ceremonial circlet, placed upon her head by Dravik's gloved hand, felt like a crown of thorns. She felt numb, detached, as if watching the events unfold from a distance. As they were declared husband and wife, Dravik leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. His breath was warm against her skin, a stark contrast to the icy chill that had settled deep within her. "Play your part, princess," he whispered, his voice a low, dangerous murmur. "And perhaps we will both survive this." Chapter 2. The Bargain of Darkness, the wedding feast, was a lavish affair, a deliberate display of wealth and power intended to project an image of unity and strength to the assembled nobles. Tables laden with roasted meats, glistening fruits, and elaborately crafted pastries stretched the length of the hall. Wine flowed freely, and the air buzzed with forced merriment. Yet, beneath the veneer of celebration, Iliara sensed an undercurrent of tension, of watchful eyes and whispered conversations. She sat beside Dravik at the head table, a silent, shadowless figure amidst the swirling colors and vibrant shadows of the court. He, in contrast, was a storm of darkness. His shadow danced and pulsed, a constant reminder of the power he wielded, the power she lacked. It seemed to press against her, a suffocating weight that made it difficult to breathe. He ate sparingly, his attention seemingly focused on the courtiers who approached, offering congratulations and veiled inquiries. Iliara watched him, studying the way he navigated the political currents, the subtle shifts in his expression, the calculated responses he offered. He was a master of this game, a predator among prey. She, on the other hand, felt like a lamb being led to slaughter. She picked at her food, her appetite non-existent. The rich flavors turned to ash in her mouth. "You should eat, princess," Dravik said, his voice low, his gaze still fixed on a particularly obsequious lordling who was attempting to curry favor. "You need your strength." His words, though seemingly practical, held a subtle barb. "You are weak. You need to be stronger." "I am not hungry," she replied, her voice equally quiet. He finally turned to look at her, his blue eyes piercing. "This is not a request. It is an order. You will maintain appearances, even if it kills you." Iliara bristled at his tone, but she knew he was right. She was a symbol, and symbols did not show weakness. She forced herself to take a bite of a roasted pheasant, chewing slowly, deliberately. As the evening wore on, Iliara found herself observing Dravik more closely. She noticed the way his shadow flickered when certain individuals approached, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw when certain topics were raised. She began to realize that his control, though seemingly absolute, was not without effort. He was known as the Shadow Lord, feared and respected throughout the kingdom. Legends spoke of his ability to crush his enemies with a mere thought, to summon shadows that could consume entire armies. Yet here, in the midst of his own court, he was wary, constantly on guard. She wondered what he feared. Later, as the festivities began to wind down, Dravik rose from his seat. "My lords and ladies," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. "I thank you for your well wishes. However, the hour grows late, and my bride and I require rest." A ripple of amusement went through the crowd. Iliara felt her cheeks flush with shame. She was a joke, a shadowless bride, a wife in name only. Dravik offered her his arm, his touch surprisingly gentle. She took it, her hand trembling slightly. As they walked towards their chambers, she could feel the eyes of the court following them, speculating, judging. The chambers assigned to them were opulent, befitting their status. A large fireplace crackled merrily, casting a warm glow on the richly furnished room. But the warmth did not reach Elira. She felt cold, isolated, despite Dravik's presence. He released her arm and turned to face her. "These are your chambers," he said, gesturing around the room. "I will occupy the adjoining suite. A door connects them, but it will remain locked. Unless there is an emergency, you will not disturb me." Elira nodded, her throat tight. "And what constitutes an emergency, Lord Dravik?" He considered this for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "An assassination attempt, a fire, an invasion. Anything less, you will handle yourself." "And what if I am the one in danger?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug. "Then you will have failed in your primary duty, to survive." His words were brutal, but they were honest. He had made no promises of protection, no vows of love. This was a bargain of darkness, and she had willingly entered into it. "I understand," she said, lifting her chin, trying to project an air of defiance she didn't feel. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a curt nod, he turned and walked towards the connecting door. He unlocked it, stepped through, and locked it again from the other side. Elira was alone. She sank onto the edge of the large, canopied bed, feeling utterly lost. The weight of her situation pressed down on her, suffocating her. She was a princess without power, a wife without a husband, a shadowless woman in a world defined by shadows. She looked around the luxurious chamber, at the rich tapestries, the gleaming furniture, the roaring fire. It was a gilded cage, and she was trapped. Tears welled up in her eyes, hot and stinging. She quickly wiped them away, refusing to give in to despair. She had made a bargain, and she would keep it. She would survive. She would find a way to navigate this treacherous court, to protect her family, to prove that even a shadowless woman could have strength. She stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out at the night sky. The stars were bright and clear, shining down on the snow-covered landscape. She took a deep breath, drawing strength from the cold, crisp air. She was Elira, Princess of Eredor, and she would not be broken. Chapter 3. Whispers of treachery. The days following the wedding settled into a tense, uneasy routine. Elira found herself adrift in the vast, labyrinthine corridors of the royal palace. She was a ghost, a silent observer, privy to the whispers and intrigues that swirled around her, yet unable to participate. Her presence was tolerated, a necessary formality, but she was never truly included. She spent her mornings in the palace library, poring over ancient texts, searching for any mention of shadowless individuals, any hint of the nature of her condition. The library was a sanctuary, a place where she could escape the judging eyes of the court and lose herself in the world of knowledge. But her searches yielded nothing of substance, only vague references to ancient myths and legends that offered no real answers. Her afternoons were spent in the company of the court ladies, a tedious exercise in forced politeness and veiled insults. They gossiped about trivial matters, their conversations laced with subtle digs at Elira's expense. She endured their company with a stoic facade, knowing that any display of weakness would be exploited. The evenings were the most difficult. She dined with Dravik, a silent, formal affair. They rarely spoke, and when they did, their words were clipped and impersonal. He treated her with a detached courtesy, a world away from the passionate, intense men in romantic tales. His shadow, however, was a constant, unsettling presence, a reminder of the vast gulf that separated them. It was during one of these silent dinners, a week after the wedding, that Elira first noticed the whispers. They were subtle at first, barely audible murmurs that she dismissed as her imagination. But they grew more persistent, more insistent, until she could no longer ignore them. They spoke of unrest, of discontent, of a growing rebellion against the crown. They spoke of a plot to overthrow the king, to destabilize the kingdom. And they spoke of Dravik, not as a loyal subject, but as a potential threat. Elyra was initially skeptical. Dravik was feared, yes, but he was also respected. He had served the kingdom loyally for years, protecting it from its enemies. Why would he turn against it now? But the whispers persisted, and Elyra began to notice other things. The furtive glances exchanged between certain courtiers, the hushed conversations that abruptly ceased when she approached, the increased security around the palace. One afternoon, while walking through the palace gardens, she overheard a conversation between two guards. They were speaking in low voices, but she caught snippets of their words. Unrest growing bolder, the shadow lured a threat. Elyra's heart quickened. She knew she should report what she had heard. But to whom? Her father? He would likely dismiss it as the ramblings of a shadowless woman. Dravik? He was the subject of the rumors. Could she trust him? She decided to observe, to gather more information before making a move. She began to pay closer attention to the movements of the court, to the whispers and rumors that circulated. She noticed that a particular group of nobles, led by Lord Valerius, a powerful and ambitious man who had always been a rival of Dravik's, seemed to be at the center of the unrest. One evening, during another silent dinner with Dravik, Elyra decided to test the waters. There are rumors, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Whispers of discontent. Dravik looked up from his plate, his blue eyes piercing. There are always rumors, princess. The court is a breeding ground for gossip. These rumors are specific, she pressed. They speak of a plot against the crown. He remained silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "And what do these rumors say about me?" Elyra hesitated. "They say that you are a threat, that you might be involved." A flicker of something, anger? Annoyance? Crossed his face, quickly vanishing behind his usual mask of impassivity. "And do you believe these rumors, princess?" She met his gaze steadily. "I do not know what to believe, Lord Dravik. But I know that something is amiss. I can feel it." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense. Then he gave a slight nod. "You are perceptive, princess. More so than I gave you credit for." He leaned back in his chair, his shadows stretching and swirling around him. "There is indeed unrest in the kingdom. Lord Valerius and his faction are growing bolder. They believe the king is weak, and they seek to replace him." "And you?" Elyra asked. "Where do you stand?" He gave a faint, humorless smile. "I stand where I always have, princess. With the kingdom. I may be feared, but I am loyal." Elyra believed him. Despite his cold demeanor, she sensed a deep-seated loyalty within him, a commitment to protecting Eredor. But she also knew that he was a pragmatist. If he believed the king was truly a liability, he would not hesitate to act. "What will you do?" she asked. "I will do what is necessary," he replied, his voice grim. "I will protect the kingdom, even if it means making difficult choices." That night, as Elyra lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The whispers had confirmed her suspicions, and Dravik's words had only reinforced her fears. A storm was brewing, and she was caught in the middle of it. She had to do something. She couldn't stand idly by while the kingdom teetered on the brink of chaos. But what could a shadowless woman do against such powerful forces? As she drifted off to sleep, a thought, a spark of an idea, began to take shape in her mind. It was a dangerous idea, a reckless idea, but it was the only one she had. She would use her defect to her advantage. She would become the shadow that no one saw coming. She would listen, she would observe, and she would uncover the truth. And then she would act. Chapter 4. The stolen shadow. The plan, as it formed in Elyra's mind, was audacious, bordering on suicidal. She would use her shadowless state to her advantage, moving unseen, unheard, a ghost in the palace. She would eavesdrop on conversations, observe secret meetings, and gather the evidence she needed to expose the conspiracy. The first step was to gain access to the areas of the palace where the conspirators were likely to meet. This was no easy task. Security had been tightened, and guards patrolled the corridors regularly. But Elira had an advantage. No one paid attention to her. She was the Shadowless princess, the insignificant wife of the feared Shadow Lord. She was invisible. She began to explore the palace, venturing into areas she had previously avoided. She discovered hidden passages, secret alcoves, and forgotten rooms. She learned the routines of the guards, the times of their patrols, the blind spots in their surveillance. One evening, she decided to target Lord Valerius's chambers. He was the most likely leader of the conspiracy, and she suspected that his rooms held crucial information. She waited until late at night, when the palace was quiet, and slipped out of her chambers. She moved through the darkened corridors, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She had never felt so alive. She reached Valerius's chambers undetected. The door was locked, but Elira had anticipated this. She had procured a set of lockpicks from a sympathetic servant, a young woman who had also been ostracized by the court. She carefully inserted the picks into the lock, her hands trembling slightly. She had never done this before, but she had watched the servant closely, and she had a natural aptitude for such things. After a few tense moments, she heard a click, and the door swung open. She slipped inside, closing the door silently behind her. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the moon through the window. She could make out the shapes of furniture, a desk, a large bed, a bookshelf. She began to search, her eyes scanning the room for anything that might be of interest. She found documents, letters, maps, but nothing that explicitly revealed the conspiracy. Then, she noticed a small, locked box on Valerius's desk. It was made of dark wood, intricately carved with images of serpents and dragons. She knew, instinctively, that this was what she was looking for. She tried to pick the lock, but it was more complex than the door. She struggled with it, her frustration growing. She was running out of time. Suddenly, she heard voices outside the door. Valerius was returning. Panic surged through her. She had to get out and fast. But she couldn't leave the box behind. In a moment of desperation, she did something she had never done before. She reached out, not with her hands, but with her lack of a shadow. She focused her will, her intent, on the box, on the secrets it contained. And then, something extraordinary happened. She felt a strange sensation, a pulling, a drawing in. It was as if the darkness around the box, the very shadows themselves, were being drawn towards her, into her. And with them came a flicker of power. The box sprang open. Elira gasped, her eyes widening in shock. She had done it. She had somehow absorbed a small part of the room's ambient shadow, using it to unlock the box. But before she could examine the contents, the door to the chamber burst open. Lord Valerius stood in the doorway, his eyes blazing with fury. Behind him stood 2 guards, their swords drawn. "You!" Valerius roared. "What are you doing here?" Elira froze, her mind racing. She was trapped. Suddenly, a figure stepped in front of her, a towering presence that filled the doorway. It was Dravok. His shadow surged forward, a monstrous wave of darkness that engulfed the room. The guards cried out in fear, stumbling backward. Valerius paled, his bravado crumbling. "Lord Dravok," Valerius stammered. I can explain." Dravok's voice was cold, deadly. "Explain what? Your treachery? Your plot against the crown?" As Dravok confronted Valerius, Elira felt a strange tugging sensation, a sharp pain in her chest. She looked down and saw, to her horror, that a tendril of Dravok's shadow was connected to her, pulsing with his power. It was as if she had inadvertently tethered herself to him when she absorbed the ambient shadow in the room. Dravok, too, seemed to feel it. He turned his head slightly, his eyes widening in surprise. He could sense her, feel her presence, her fear. The connection was brief, but it was profound. It was a link, a bond, forged in the heart of darkness. "Get out," Dravok commanded Valerius, his voice low and dangerous, and not only directed at the Lord. And take your guards with you. Valerius, shaken and defeated, obeyed. He and his guards fled the room, leaving Elira and Dravik alone. Dravik turned to Elira, his expression a mixture of anger, confusion, and something else. Something she couldn't quite decipher. What, he said, his voice tight, was that? Elira couldn't speak. She could only stare at him, at the tendril of shadow that still connected them, pulsing with a life of its own. Chapter 5. Tethered souls. The silence in Valerius's chamber stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the frantic beat of Elira's heart. The tendril of Dravik's shadow, a living extension of his power, still snaked between them, a visible manifestation of the invisible bond they had forged. It pulsed with a dark energy, a rhythmic ebb and flow that mirrored the tumultuous emotions swirling within her. Dravik stared at the connection, his blue eyes narrowed in a mixture of disbelief and apprehension. He reached out a hand, as if to touch it, then hesitated, his fingers curling into a fist. "What did you do?" he repeated, his voice a low growl. Elira struggled to find her voice. I don't know," she stammered. "I was trying to open the box, and it just happened." She explained, haltingly, about her ability to absorb shadows, how she had instinctively reached out with her lack of one, drawing in the ambient darkness of the room. She omitted the part about eavesdropping and her suspicions of a conspiracy, focusing solely on the accidental nature of the magical connection. Dravik listened, his expression hardening with each word. When she finished, he remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the pulsing tendril of shadow. "You absorb shadow?" he finally said, his voice laced with skepticism. "That's impossible. Shadow magic doesn't work that way." "I know it sounds impossible," Elira said, her voice pleading. "But it happened. I felt it. And I think you felt it too." He didn't deny it. He couldn't. The connection between them was undeniable, a palpable force that resonated with their shared magic. He took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. "What else can you do?" he asked, his voice softer now, tinged with curiosity. Elira hesitated. She was afraid to reveal the full extent of her newfound power, afraid of his reaction. But she knew she couldn't hide it from him, not anymore. "I think I can absorb other people's shadows," she confessed. "Temporarily. I can borrow their power." Dravik's eyes widened. "Borrow their power?" He repeated the words as if tasting something dangerous and unknown. Before Elira could respond, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The room spun, and she stumbled, her knees buckling. Dravik caught her before she fell, his strong arms wrapping around her. The contact intensified the connection between them. A surge of energy, raw and powerful, flowed through her, overwhelming her senses. She could feel Dravik's emotions, his fear, his confusion, his concern. And he, she realized, could feel hers. "Elira," he said, his voice sharp with alarm. "What's happening?" "I don't know," she gasped. "It's too much." The tendril of shadow between them pulsed violently, then snapped, like a severed cord. The connection was broken. Elira collapsed into Dravik's arms, unconscious. When she awoke, she was lying in her own bed, in her own chambers. The room was dimly lit, the only source of light the flickering flames in the fireplace. Dravik was sitting beside her, his face etched with worry. "You're awake," he said, his voice relieved. Elira sat up, her head throbbing. What happened?" "You passed out," he said. After the connection broke. She remembered the surge of energy, the overwhelming flood of emotions. It had been too much for her to handle. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice weak. "I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," he said, cutting her off. "It wasn't your fault. It was an accident." But he didn't sound entirely convinced. He was still trying to understand what had happened, how she had managed to absorb his shadow, to create a connection between them. He stood up and walked over to the window, his back to her. His shadow stretched and swirled around him, a restless, agitated dance. "This changes things," he said, his voice low. Elira knew he was right. The accidental bonding had irrevocably altered their relationship. They were no longer just a princess and a lord, bound by a political arrangement. They were connected, tethered by a magic they didn't understand. What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He turned to face her, his blue eyes searching hers. "We're going to figure it out," he said. "Together." He paused, then added, "And we're going to find out who is plotting against the crown. Your ability might be useful in that regard." Iliara's heart skipped a beat. He knew. He knew about her suspicions, about her eavesdropping. "How?" she began. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "I felt it, Iliara. When we were connected. I felt your fear, your determination, your suspicion. The tether, it seemed, had revealed more than just their powers. It had revealed their thoughts, their feelings, their secrets. They were tethered souls, bound by a magic they didn't understand, caught in a web of intrigue and danger. And they had to navigate it together." Chapter 6. Court of Deceit. The revelation of their magical connection, however accidental, hung heavy in the air between them. It was an unspoken truth, a shared secret that colored every interaction. The formal distance they had maintained since their wedding now felt strained, artificial, undermined by the intimate, involuntary glimpse they'd had into each other's minds. Dravik, ever pragmatic, was the first to break the silence that had fallen after their conversation. "We need to be careful," he said, his voice low and serious. "No one can know about this, about your ability, or our connection." Iliara nodded, her heart pounding. The danger felt more real now, more immediate. If word of her shadow absorption, or their tether, reached the wrong ears, it could be disastrous. It could expose them both to accusations of witchcraft, of forbidden magic. It could ruin them. "Valerius suspects something," she said, remembering his furious expression, the way he'd looked at her in his chambers. "He might not know exactly what happened, but he knows it wasn't normal." Dravik's jaw tightened. "Valerius is a snake. We need to be one step ahead of him." He paused, then added, "We need to find out who else is involved in the conspiracy. And we need to do it quickly." The "we" was significant. It was no longer just Iliara's problem, or Dravik's duty. It was a shared burden, a joint endeavor. The tether, however unintended, had forged a partnership. They agreed on a plan. Iliara would continue to use her shadowless state to her advantage, gathering information, observing the court, listening for whispers of treachery. Dravik, with his power and influence, would work from the inside, subtly investigating the suspected conspirators, maneuvering them into positions where they could be exposed. The days that followed were a tense dance of deception. Iliara, playing the role of the insignificant, shadowless princess, moved through the court like a ghost, unnoticed, unremarked. She attended the tedious social gatherings, endured the veiled insults, and all the while, she listened. She watched. She learned to distinguish the subtle signs of guilt, the nervous glances, the hushed conversations, the coded messages passed between certain courtiers. She identified several more nobles who seemed to be aligned with Valerius, forming a web of conspiracy that stretched further than she had initially imagined. Dravik, meanwhile, played his own game of deception. He maintained his usual aloof, intimidating demeanor, projecting an image of unwavering loyalty to the crown. But beneath the surface, he was working tirelessly, gathering evidence, manipulating events, subtly turning the conspirators against each other. The shared experience, the danger they both faced, drew the pair together. The evenings spent together were no longer silent. They spoke softly of the day's events. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day of courtly maneuvering, Iliara found herself alone with Dravik in their shared sitting room. The fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. "It's like walking on eggshells," she said, her voice weary. "Every conversation, every interaction, is a performance. I feel like I'm constantly on the verge of being discovered." Dravik nodded, his expression grim. "It is a dangerous game, Iliara. But we have no choice. We must play it to win." He looked at her, his blue eyes searching hers. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Elira was taken aback by his concern. It was the first time he had shown any genuine empathy for her, any acknowledgement of the emotional toll this was taking. "I'm managing," she said, her voice a little shaky. "It's frightening, but it's also exhilarating. I feel like I'm finally doing something meaningful." He gave a slight nod, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "I know the feeling," he said. "The feeling of purpose, of using your power, however unconventional, to make a difference." A comfortable silence fell between them, a silence that was no longer strained, but shared. It was a moment of connection, of understanding, forged in the crucible of their shared danger. Then Dravik said, his voice low, "We need to be more careful about the connection. We can't let it happen again." Elira nodded, her cheeks flushing slightly. The memory of the intense, overwhelming surge of energy, the feeling of their minds merging, was still vivid in her mind. "I don't know how to control it," she confessed. "It just happened." "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice firm. "We'll learn to control it. Together." The word "together" hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. It was a promise, a commitment, a recognition of the bond that had formed between them, a bond that was more than just magical, more than just political. It was a bond of shared purpose, of mutual respect, and, perhaps, something more. Chapter 7. Echoes of feeling the accidental connection, the brief but intense merging of their minds, had left a lingering residue, a subtle shift in their awareness of each other. It was like a faint echo, a resonance that hummed beneath the surface of their interactions. They were more attuned to each other's emotions, more sensitive to the subtle shifts in their moods. Elira found herself noticing things about Dravik that she had previously overlooked. The way his jaw tightened when he was suppressing anger, the slight softening of his eyes when he thought no one was watching, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hands when he was under stress. And she knew, instinctively, that he was noticing things about her too. He was more aware of her fears, her anxieties, her moments of quiet determination. He was more protective of her, more attentive to her needs. This heightened awareness made their deception even more challenging. They had to be constantly on guard, not only against the external threat of the conspiracy, but also against the internal threat of their own emotions. They couldn't afford to let their feelings, whatever they might be, cloud their judgment or betray their secrets. One afternoon, Elira was in the palace gardens, ostensibly taking the air, but in reality, observing a clandestine meeting between Lord Valerius and two other nobles she had identified as conspirators. They were speaking in low voices, their heads close together, their expressions conspiratorial. Elira strained to hear their words, but they were too far away. She considered using her shadow absorption to enhance her hearing, but she was hesitant. The experience in Valerius's chambers had been frightening, and she was still unsure of her ability to control the power. Suddenly, she felt a familiar tingling sensation, a faint echo of the connection they had shared. It wasn't a full merging of minds, but it was enough to sharpen her senses, to amplify the sounds around her. She could hear Valerius's words clearly now, his plans to incite rebellion, to seize the throne. She realized, with a jolt of understanding, that the enhanced hearing wasn't coming from her own power. It was coming from Dravik. He was somehow amplifying her senses, using the remnants of their connection to help her. She glanced around, searching for him, but he was nowhere to be seen. He was doing this remotely, from a distance, subtly, invisibly. She listened intently, gathering the information she needed, then discreetly withdrew from the gardens, her heart pounding. Later that evening, she found Dravik alone in his study, poring over a map of the kingdom. He looked up as she entered, his eyes questioning. "I heard them," she said, her voice low. "Valerius is planning to move soon. He's gathering support from several border lords, promising them land and power in exchange for their loyalty." Dravik nodded, his expression grim. "We need to act quickly. We need to expose him before he can launch his rebellion." He paused, then looked at her more closely. "How did you hear them? You were quite far away." Elira hesitated. She didn't want to reveal the extent of their lingering connection, the way he had subtly enhanced her senses. But she couldn't lie to him, not anymore. "I think it was you," she said, her voice uncertain. "I felt a connection, a faint echo, and it amplified my hearing." Dravik's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. He hadn't realized he was doing it, hadn't consciously intended to help her in that way. It had been instinctive, a subconscious response to her need. "It seems," he said, his voice thoughtful, "that the tether is not entirely severed. There are remnants, echoes of feeling that linger between us." This realization was both unsettling and intriguing. It suggested a deeper connection than they had previously understood, a bond that went beyond the accidental merging of their magic. "What does it mean?" Elira asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dravik shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "But we need to be careful. We can't let it control us. We can't let it distract us from our goal." But even as he said the words, Elira sensed a subtle shift in his tone, a hint of uncertainty. The connection, the echoes of feeling, were affecting him too. They were drawing them closer, weaving a web of intimacy that was both dangerous and irresistible. They spent the rest of the evening discussing their strategy, formulating a plan to expose Valerius and his conspirators. But beneath the surface of their conversation, the unspoken truth of their connection hummed, a constant reminder of the complex, evolving relationship that was forming between them. A relationship built on a fragile dance between a lie and an unwavering truth. Chapter 8. The Shadow Trials. King Theron, increasingly concerned by the rumors of unrest, decided to hold a grand tournament to Shadow Trial to demonstrate the strength and unity of the kingdom. It was a tradition in Eredor, a public display of magical prowess where nobles showcased their shadow abilities in a series of contests and challenges. The trial was ostensibly a celebration, a spectacle designed to entertain the populace and reassure them of the stability of the realm. But beneath the surface, it was a political maneuver, a way for the king to assess the loyalty of his nobles, to identify potential threats. For Elira and Dravik, the Shadow Trial presented both an opportunity and a risk. It was a chance to observe the conspirators in a controlled environment, to gauge their strength and their intentions. But it was also a risk, a potential exposure of their own secrets. Dravik, as one of the most powerful shadow wielders in the kingdom, was expected to participate, to put on a dazzling display of his abilities. Elira, as his shadowless wife, was expected to be a silent, unobtrusive presence at his side. The days leading up to the trial were filled with tension. Elira and Dravik worked tirelessly, refining their plan, preparing for any eventuality. They practiced controlling the remnants of their connection, learning to subtly enhance each other's senses, to communicate without words. They discovered that the connection was strongest when they were in close proximity, when their emotions were heightened, when they were focused on a common goal. It was a fragile, unpredictable link, but it was also a powerful tool. On the day of the trial, the grand arena was packed with spectators. The air buzzed with excitement, with anticipation. The banners of the various noble houses fluttered in the breeze, a riot of colors against the clear blue sky. Elira sat beside Dravik in the royal box, her heart pounding. She wore a gown of deep blue, similar to the one she had worn at their wedding, but this one was subtly different. It was lined with a thin layer of shadow-absorbing fabric, a precaution she had taken, a way to subtly enhance her own power. Dravik looked magnificent. He wore black armor, polished to a mirror sheen, his shadow swirling around him like a living cloak. He was a figure of awe and fear, a symbol of the power of Eredor. The trial began with a series of individual displays. Nobles showcased their abilities, manipulating their shadows to create illusions, to conjure weapons, to perform feats of strength and agility. The crowd roared its approval, cheering for their favorites, gasping at the displays of power. Elira watched, her senses heightened, alert for any sign of treachery. She noticed the subtle interactions between the conspirators, the coded glances, the veiled threats. She felt Dravik's presence beside her, a steady, reassuring warmth, a silent promise of protection. Then it was Dravik's turn. He entered the arena, and a hush fell over the crowd. He raised his hand, and his shadow surged forward, a vast, inky wave that engulfed the entire arena. It was a breathtaking display of power, a demonstration of his absolute control. But then, something unexpected happened. A figure emerged from the shadows, a figure cloaked in darkness, a figure with a shadow that rivaled Dravok's own. It was Lord Valerius. He had somehow amplified his own shadow, enhanced his power beyond what anyone thought possible. He was challenging Dravok, not just in the trial, but for the very future of the kingdom. Dravok, Valerius said, his voice echoing through the arena. You have grown complacent. You have forgotten the true meaning of power. I am here to remind you. A gasp went through the crowd. This was not part of the planned spectacle. This was a rebellion, an open challenge to the crown. Dravok stood his ground, his eyes blazing with fury. His shadow surged, responding to his anger, to his will. Valerius, he said, his voice cold and deadly. You dare to challenge me? You dare to threaten the kingdom? The two men faced each other, their shadows clashing, a battle of wills, a battle of power. The fate of Eredor hung in the balance. Elyra watched, her heart in her throat. She knew that Dravok was strong, but Valerius had somehow gained an advantage. She had to do something. She had to help him. She focused her will, her intent, on Dravok, on their connection. She reached out with her lack of a shadow, drawing in the ambient darkness of the arena, subtly, invisibly. And then she felt it. The connection, stronger than ever before, a surge of power flowing between them. She was amplifying Dravok's shadow, enhancing his power, giving him the edge he needed. The battle raged, a spectacular display of magical might. Shadows clashed, intertwined, forming monstrous shapes, battling for dominance. Finally, with a roar of effort, Dravok unleashed a final surge of power. His shadow overwhelmed Valerius's, engulfing him, crushing him. Valerius collapsed, defeated, his amplified shadow dissipating. The crowd erupted in cheers, a mixture of relief and awe. Dravok had won. He had defended the kingdom. He had crushed the rebellion. But Elyra knew that the battle was far from over. Valerius was just one piece in a larger game. The conspiracy still existed, and they still had to uncover it, to expose it, to destroy it. As Dravok stood, victorious, in the center of the arena, he turned to Elyra, his eyes searching hers. He knew what she had done. He had felt her power, her support, her love. And in that moment, the unspoken truth between them became undeniable. They were more than just allies, more than just partners. They were bound by a connection that was deeper, stronger, than anything they had ever imagined. A love born of shared danger, and now, a shared victory. Chapter 9. Masks and Mirrors. The aftermath of the Shadow trials was a whirlwind of activity. Valerius, stripped of his titles and power, was imprisoned, awaiting trial for treason. The other conspirators, exposed by Dravok's subtle manipulations and Elyra's careful observations, were quickly rounded up and arrested. The kingdom breathed a collective sigh of relief. The immediate threat had been neutralized, and the crown seemed secure. King Theron, visibly shaken by the near rebellion, publicly praised Dravok for his loyalty and his strength, showering him with honors and accolades. But Elyra and Dravok knew that the victory was incomplete. Valerius had been a powerful figure, but he was not the mastermind behind the conspiracy. He was a pawn, a tool used by someone else, someone more cunning, more powerful, someone who remained hidden in the shadows. They returned to their chambers, the adrenaline of the trial fading, replaced by a quiet determination. The shared experience, the public display of their combined power, had shifted their relationship once again. The pretense of a formal, distant marriage was no longer sustainable. "We were close," Dravok said, his voice low, as he removed his armor, piece by piece. "Too close." Someone might have noticed the connection. Elyra nodded, her heart pounding. She had felt the surge of power between them, the way their shadows had intertwined, almost merged, in the arena. It had been exhilarating, terrifying, and undeniably intimate. "It was necessary," she said, her voice a little shaky. I needed to help you." He turned to face her, his blue eyes searching hers. "You saved me, Elira," he said, his voice soft. "You risked everything to help me." She looked away, her cheeks flushing. She hadn't thought of it as saving him, not consciously. It had been instinctive, a desperate act fueled by what? By loyalty? By duty? By love? She didn't dare speak the word, not yet. It was too soon, too dangerous. But the feeling was there, undeniable, growing stronger with each passing day. "We still have work to do," she said, changing the subject, trying to regain her composure. "Valerius was not the mastermind. We need to find out who is pulling his strings." Dravik nodded, his expression hardening. "We will," he said. "And we will expose them, no matter who they are." They spent the next few days delving deeper into the conspiracy, examining the evidence they had gathered, searching for clues, for connections. They discovered that Valerius had been receiving secret messages, coded instructions, from an unknown source. The messages were written in a complex cipher, one that Elira, despite her knowledge of ancient languages, couldn't decipher. "We need help," she said, her frustration growing. "We need someone who is an expert in cryptography, someone we can trust." Dravik considered this for a moment, his brow furrowed. "There is one person," he said, his voice hesitant. "But it's a risk." He told her about a scholar, a recluse named Master Alaric, who lived in a remote tower on the outskirts of the kingdom. Alaric was known for his brilliant mind, his vast knowledge of ancient lore and forgotten languages. But he was also known for his eccentric personality, his distrust of the court, his unconventional methods. "He's the best," Dravik said. "But he's also unpredictable. He might refuse to help us. He might even betray us." Elira weighed the risks, the potential benefits. They were running out of time. The mastermind was still out there plotting, scheming. They needed Alaric's help. "We have no choice," she said. "We have to take the risk." They decided to travel to Alaric's tower in secret, disguising themselves as ordinary travelers. They left the palace under cover of darkness, their shadows blending with the night. The journey was long and arduous, taking them through dense forests, across rugged mountains, and over treacherous rivers. But they pressed on, driven by their determination to uncover the truth. The forced solitude further cemented what they had only just begun to realize. As they traveled, they talked, sharing their fears, their hopes, their dreams. They learned more about each other, about their pasts, about their motivations. Elira discovered that Dravik's cold, aloof demeanor was a mask, a defense mechanism he had developed to protect himself from the pain and the responsibility of his power. He had been feared and ostracized since childhood, burdened by the expectations of his family, by the weight of his destiny. Dravik, in turn, learned about Elira's loneliness, her feelings of inadequacy, her yearning for acceptance. He saw her strength, her intelligence, her courage, qualities that had been hidden beneath the surface of her shadowless existence. The journey, the shared danger, the intimate conversations, stripped away the remaining barriers between them. They were no longer just allies, just partners. They were something more. They reached Alaric's tower, a tall, imposing structure that jutted out from the rocky landscape like a defiant finger pointing at the sky. The tower was shrouded in mist, giving it an eerie, otherworldly appearance. As they approached, they saw a figure standing at the top of the tower, silhouetted against the setting sun. It was Master Alaric. He was watching them, waiting for them. The masks they had worn for so long, the mirrors they had used to hide their true selves, were beginning to crack. And beneath, the truth of their feelings, the reality of their connection, was beginning to emerge. Chapter 10. A flicker of light. Master Alaric was unusual. He was an old man, with a long, flowing white beard and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through them. He wore a robe covered in strange symbols and carried a staff topped with a glowing crystal. He greeted them with a mixture of suspicion and amusement, his gaze lingering on Elira's lack of a shadow. So, he said, his voice raspy but surprisingly strong, the Shadow Lord and his shadowless bride. What brings you to my humble abode? Dravik explained their situation, their investigation into the conspiracy, their need for his expertise in deciphering the coded messages. He was careful not to reveal too much, not to mention Iliara's ability or their connection. Alaric listened intently, his eyes twinkling. Intriguing, he said when Dravik finished. A conspiracy, you say? A plot against the crown? And you believe I can help you? You are the best, Dravik said. Your knowledge of ancient languages and ciphers is unmatched. Alaric chuckled, a dry, crackling sound. Flattery will get you everywhere, Shadow Lord. But it won't guarantee my cooperation. He paused, then looked at Iliara. And you, Shadowless One, what do you offer in exchange for my services? Iliara met his gaze steadily. We offer you the truth, she said. The chance to help save the kingdom from a hidden enemy. Alaric studied her for a long moment, his eyes seeming to penetrate her very soul. Then he gave a slight nod. Very well, he said. I will help you. But on my terms. His terms were eccentric. He demanded that they stay in his tower, that they follow his instructions implicitly, that they submit to his unconventional methods of investigation. The tower itself was a strange and wondrous place, filled with ancient books, bizarre artifacts, and magical contraptions. The air hummed with energy, and the walls seemed to whisper secrets. Alaric set to work immediately, examining the coded messages, poring over his ancient texts, muttering to himself in strange languages. He was a whirlwind of activity, a chaotic force of nature. Iliara and Dravik, meanwhile, found themselves in close quarters, sharing a small, sparsely furnished room. The forced intimacy was both awkward and exciting. The remnants of their connection, the echoes of feeling, were amplified by their proximity, by the strange energy of the tower. They tried to maintain a professional distance, to focus on the task at hand. But it was becoming increasingly difficult. The masks they had worn for so long were crumbling, revealing the raw, vulnerable emotions beneath. One evening, after a long day of studying Alaric's cryptic notes, Iliara found herself alone with Dravik in their room. The fire in the hearth had died down, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. He's brilliant, she said, her voice soft, breaking the silence. But he's also mad. Dravik gave a slight smile. Madness and brilliance often go hand in hand, he said, especially in matters of magic. He looked at her, his blue eyes searching hers. Are you afraid, Iliara? He asked, his voice gentle. She hesitated. She was afraid, yes, of the conspiracy, of the unknown mastermind, of her own uncertain power. But she was also afraid of something else, something more personal, more intimate. I'm not sure, she said, her voice a little shaky. I'm afraid of failing, of letting you down. He took a step closer, his gaze holding hers. You won't let me down, Iliara, he said, his voice low. You never have. He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a shiver through her, a spark of electricity that ignited a flame within her. She looked up at him, her eyes meeting his. She saw in his gaze a reflection of her own feelings, a mixture of fear, desire, and something more. Something deeper, stronger, something that had been growing between them, silently, inevitably. He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers. It was a tentative kiss, a question, an invitation. Iliara responded, her lips parting beneath his. The kiss deepened, becoming more passionate, more urgent. It was a release, a surrender, an acknowledgement of the feelings they had both been denying for so long. The remnants of their connection flared, a surge of energy passing between them, not overwhelming, but exhilarating. They could feel each other's emotions, their desires, their love. It was a flicker of light, a moment of pure, unadulterated connection, in the midst of the darkness that surrounded them. They broke apart, breathless, their hearts pounding. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, bound by a love that had blossomed in the shadows. Iliara, Dravik whispered, his voice husky. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The words were unspoken, but they were understood. They were in love. But even in this moment of intimacy, the reality of their situation loomed. They were in danger, surrounded by enemies, their future uncertain. They had found a flicker of light, a moment of love, in the darkness. But they still had to navigate the shadows, to uncover the truth, to save the kingdom. And they would do it together. Chapter 11. The Serpent's Gambit. The kiss, the shared confession of their unspoken feelings, changed everything. It was a turning point, a moment of clarity that solidified their bond and intensified their determination. They were no longer just allies, partners in a dangerous game. They were lovers, bound by a love that was as powerful as it was forbidden. But their newfound intimacy also heightened the risks. They had to be even more careful, more discreet. The court was a nest of vipers, and any sign of weakness, any hint of their relationship, could be exploited by their enemies. Master Alaric, oblivious to the emotional earthquake that had occurred between his guests, continued his work on the coded messages. He was close to a breakthrough, he announced, his eyes gleaming with excitement. He had identified the cipher, a complex variation of an ancient Elvish script, and he was on the verge of deciphering the messages. One evening, Alaric burst into their room, his face flushed with triumph. "I've done it!" he exclaimed. "I've cracked the code." He spread the messages out on a table, pointing to the translated text. The messages revealed a series of instructions, outlining a plan to assassinate King Theron and place a puppet ruler on the throne. The mastermind behind the conspiracy was not named, but their identity was hinted at, cloaked in cryptic references and symbolic language. "The serpent in the royal garden," Alaric read, his voice trembling with excitement. "The one who wears the crown of thorns. The mother of lies." Elyra and Dravik exchanged a look of shock. The references were clear, unmistakable. The mastermind was Queen Lyra, Elyra's own mother. Elyra felt a wave of nausea, of disbelief. Her own mother? Plotting to kill her own husband, to seize the throne? It was unthinkable, monstrous. "It can't be," she whispered, her voice shaking. "My mother, she wouldn't." Dravik placed a comforting hand on her arm. "We have to face the truth, Elyra," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "The evidence is clear." The messages also revealed the date and time of the planned assassination. It was to take place during the upcoming Festival of Shadows, a grand celebration held annually in the capital city. The Queen planned to use the chaos and confusion of the festival to strike, to eliminate the king and seize control. They had to act quickly. They had to warn the king, to expose the queen, to prevent the assassination. They decided to return to the palace immediately, to confront the queen and foil her plot. But as they prepared to leave, Alaric stopped them. "Beware," he said, his voice grave. "The serpent is cunning. She has laid a trap for you, a gambit to ensnare you." He handed Dravik a small, intricately carved amulet. "This will protect you," he said. "It will shield you from her magic." They thanked Alaric and set off, their hearts heavy with dread. The journey back to the palace was tense, fraught with danger. They knew that the queen's spies were everywhere, that they were being watched, hunted. As they approached the capital city, they saw that preparations for the Festival of Shadows were already underway. The streets were decorated with colorful banners, and the air was filled with the sounds of music and laughter. But beneath the surface of the celebration, Elyra could sense a dark undercurrent, a feeling of unease. They reached the palace gates, and Dravik used his authority to gain entry. They were immediately surrounded by guards, loyal to the king, but also wary, suspicious. Dravik explained the situation, revealing the queen's plot, presenting the deciphered messages as evidence. The guards were initially skeptical, but Dravik's authority and the urgency in his voice convinced them. They agreed to help, to escort Elyra and Dravik to the king, to protect them from the queen's forces. But as they made their way through the palace corridors, they were ambushed. A group of elite guards, loyal to the queen, attacked them, their swords flashing in the dim light. The battle was fierce, chaotic. Dravik fought with his usual skill and power, his shadow a swirling vortex of darkness, protecting Elira, protecting the guards who were loyal to the king. Elira, too, joined the fight, using her shadow absorption to enhance her strength and agility. She had grown more confident in her abilities, more skilled in controlling her power. She would keep Dravik safe. But the queen's guards were numerous, well-trained, and ruthless. They were slowly gaining the upper hand. Suddenly, Elira felt a sharp pain in her back. She cried out, stumbling, falling to her knees. One of the queen's guards had stabbed her, a poisoned blade aimed to kill. Dravik roared in fury, his shadow surging with uncontrolled power. He unleashed a devastating blast of energy, obliterating the remaining guards, clearing a path to Elira. He knelt beside her, his face etched with anguish. "Elira," he cried, "stay with me." He ripped a piece of fabric from his tunic, pressing it against the wound, trying to staunch the bleeding. But the poison was spreading quickly, weakening her, dimming her vision. "Dravik," she whispered, her voice faint. I love you." Her eyes closed, and she went limp in his arms. Dravik felt a surge of despair, of rage, unlike anything he had ever experienced. He had failed. He had failed to protect her, to save her. He cradled her body in his arms, his tears falling onto her pale face. He was surrounded by enemies, his love lay dying in his arms, and the kingdom was on the brink of chaos. The Serpent's Gambit had succeeded. Chapter 12. Beneath the shadow, Dravik's world had narrowed to the cold, still form of Elira in his arms. The sounds of the palace, the echoes of the battle, faded into a distant hum. All that remained was the crushing weight of grief and the burning fire of rage. He had promised to protect her, to keep her safe, and he had failed. He gently lifted her, cradling her body close, and carried her away from the carnage, away from the prying eyes of the court. He found a small, secluded chamber, a forgotten storage room, and laid her down on a pile of discarded tapestries. He knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he examined the wound. The poison was potent, a fast-acting venom designed to kill quickly. He could feel her life force fading, her connection to him growing weaker, more tenuous. He remembered Alaric's words, his warning about the Serpent's Gambit, the trap she had laid. He had been so focused on exposing the queen, on protecting the king, that he had failed to protect the one person who mattered most to him. He closed his eyes, his mind racing, searching for a solution, a way to save her. He had little knowledge of healing magic, of antidotes. He was a warrior, a wielder of shadows, not a healer. Then he remembered something. A legend, a myth he had heard whispered among the shadow wielders of Eridor. A forbidden magic, a dangerous ritual that could supposedly transfer life force from one person to another. It was a desperate gamble, a last resort. It was said to be incredibly risky, potentially fatal to both the giver and the receiver. But he had no other choice. He would do anything, risk anything, to save Elira. He took a deep breath, steeling his resolve. He placed his hands on either side of her wound, focusing his will, his intent, on the connection that still lingered between them, the faint echo of their tether. He began to chant, the words of the ancient ritual flowing from his lips, a low, guttural murmur that resonated with the power of his shadow. His shadow responded, swirling around them, enveloping them in a cocoon of darkness. He could feel the energy flowing from him into her, a transfer of life force, of essence. It was a painful, agonizing process, draining his strength, weakening him. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He felt her response, a faint flicker of life, a stirring within her. The connection between them strengthened, pulsing with renewed energy. He continued the ritual, pushing himself to the limit, pouring his life force into her, willing her to live. He could feel the poison receding, its grip on her loosening. But the cost was high. He could feel himself growing weaker, his vision blurring, his consciousness fading. He was giving her his life, his essence, his very soul. He didn't care. He would gladly sacrifice himself for her, for the woman he loved. As the last of his strength ebbed away, he saw a faint glimmer of light in her eyes. She stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Dravik, she whispered, her voice weak, but alive. He smiled, a weak, trembling smile. He had done it. He had saved her. Then, darkness consumed him. He awoke to the sensation of warmth, of softness, of a gentle hand stroking his hair. He opened his eyes, his vision blurry at first, then gradually clearing. He was lying on a bed, in a dimly lit room. Elyra was sitting beside him, her face pale but radiant, her eyes filled with tears of relief. "Dravik," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You're alive." He tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his voice hoarse. He managed a weak. "Elyra," she leaned down and kissed him, a tender, loving kiss that conveyed all the emotions she couldn't express in words. She explained what had happened, how she had awakened to find him unconscious, his life force almost extinguished. She had used her own shadow absorption, drawing on the ambient energy of the room, to replenish his strength, to bring him back from the brink of death. They had saved each other. They had defied death itself. Their bond, their love, had proven stronger than any magic, any poison, any plot. But the danger was not over. The queen was still at large, her plans still in motion. They had to stop her before it was too late. They were weak, exhausted, but they were alive. And they were together. They would face the darkness, beneath the shadow, and they would emerge victorious. Chapter 13. The price of power. The shared near-death experience had forged an even deeper connection between Elyra and Dravik. They were bound not just by love and magic, but by a shared sacrifice, a mutual understanding of the fragility of life and the power of their bond. They were two halves of a whole, each incomplete without the other. But their respite was brief. The Festival of Shadows was fast approaching, and with it, the Queen's planned assassination of the king. They had to act quickly to expose the Queen and prevent her from carrying out her deadly plot. They left the secluded chamber, Dravik still weak but determined, Elyra supporting him, her own strength renewed by their shared ordeal. They knew they couldn't return to the main palace, not yet. The Queen's spies were everywhere, and they would be too vulnerable. They sought refuge in a hidden network of tunnels and secret passages beneath the palace, a labyrinth known only to a select few. It was a dangerous place, filled with shadows and forgotten secrets, but it was also a sanctuary, a place where they could regroup and plan their next move. As they navigated the tunnels, Dravik's strength gradually returned, fueled by Elyra's unwavering support and the remnants of their shared magic. They discussed their strategy, weighing their options. "We can't confront the Queen directly," Dravik said, his voice still hoarse, but gaining strength. "She's too powerful, and she has the support of the royal guard. We need to expose her," Elyra said. "We need to reveal her plot to the king, to the court, to the people." But how? The deciphered messages were no longer in their possession, lost during the ambush. And even if they had them, the Queen would likely deny their authenticity, claiming they were forgeries. They needed proof, irrefutable evidence that would convince even the most skeptical. Then Elyra had an idea. A risky, dangerous idea, but potentially their only hope. "My mother," she said, her voice hesitant. She keeps a diary. A secret journal where she records her thoughts, her plans, her crimes." Dravik looked at her, his eyes widening in surprise. "How do you know this?" "I saw it once," she said. "When I was a child." She hid it in her private chambers, behind a secret panel in the wall. It was a long shot, but it was their best chance. If they could find the diary, if they could retrieve it and present it to the king, they could expose the Queen's treachery and prevent the assassination. But getting to the Queen's chambers would be incredibly dangerous. It was the most heavily guarded area of the palace, and the Queen herself would likely be there, preparing for the festival. "It's too risky," Dravik said, his voice filled with concern. "I won't let you go alone." "I won't be alone," Elyra said, her voice firm. "I'll have you with me. We'll do it together." They knew the risks, the potential consequences. But they were willing to face them, for the sake of the kingdom, for the sake of their love. They waited until nightfall, until the palace was quiet, and then they set off, moving through the hidden tunnels, their shadows blending with the darkness. They reached the secret passage that led to the queen's chambers, their hearts pounding in their chests. Elira located the hidden panel, her fingers tracing the familiar pattern on the wall. She pressed a hidden catch, and the panel slid open, revealing a small, dark alcove. And there it was, the Queen's diary. Elira reached for it, her hand trembling. But as she touched the book, a wave of dark energy surged through the room, throwing her and Dravik backward. The Queen stood in the doorway, her eyes blazing with fury, her shadow a monstrous, swirling vortex of darkness. "You," she hissed, her voice filled with venom. "You dare to trespass in my chambers? You dare to betray me?" She raised her hand, and a bolt of dark energy shot towards them, a deadly blast of pure power. Dravik shielded Elira with his body, absorbing the brunt of the attack. He cried out in pain, his shadow flickering, weakening. The price of power was high, and they were about to pay it. Chapter 14. Shared Scars. The Queen's attack had been brutal, a direct assault on Dravik's life force. He lay on the floor of the hidden passage, weakened and wounded, his shadow flickering erratically, a reflection of his fading strength. Elira knelt beside him, her heart pounding with fear and desperation. "Dravik," she cried, her voice choked with emotion. "Stay with me. Don't leave me." She pressed her hands against his chest, trying to staunch the flow of energy, to channel her own strength into him. But the Queen's magic was potent, a dark, corrosive force that was eating away at his life force. The Queen advanced, her eyes blazing with triumph. "Foolish girl," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You cannot save him. He is mine to control, mine to destroy." Elira looked up at her mother, her heart filled with a mixture of rage and sorrow. This was not the woman who had raised her, the woman who had, despite her coldness, shown her occasional flickers of affection. This was a monster, consumed by ambition, consumed by darkness. "He is not yours," Elira said, her voice trembling but firm. "He is his own person. And he is my love." The Queen laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "Love? You think love can conquer power? You are a fool, just like your father." She raised her hand again, preparing to deliver the final blow, to extinguish Dravik's life and claim her victory. But Elira was not defeated. She had one last weapon, one last resort. She focused her will, her intent, on the connection that still lingered between her and Dravik, the faint echo of their tether. She reached out with her lack of a shadow, drawing in not just the ambient darkness of the passage, but also the Queen's own shadow, the very source of her power. It was a reckless, dangerous gamble. She had never attempted to absorb such a vast amount of shadow energy before, especially not from someone as powerful as the Queen. It could overwhelm her, consume her, destroy her. But she had no choice. She had to save Dravik. She had to save the kingdom. She felt the Queen's shadow surge into her, a torrent of dark energy that threatened to tear her apart. She gasped, her body convulsing, her vision blurring. But she held on. She focused on Dravik, on their love, on their shared purpose. She channeled the energy, controlling it, shaping it. And then she unleashed it. A wave of pure shadow energy erupted from her, striking the Queen with the force of a battering ram. The Queen screamed, her own shadow recoiling, her power momentarily disrupted. Elira collapsed beside Dravik, exhausted, drained, but alive. The Queen, stunned and weakened, staggered backward, her eyes filled with disbelief. "Impossible," she whispered. You have no shadow. I may not have a shadow of my own," Elira said, her voice weak but defiant. "But I can wield the shadows of others. And I will use them to protect the kingdom, to protect the man I love." The Queen, realizing that she had underestimated her daughter, that she had lost the advantage, turned and fled, disappearing into the labyrinthine corridors of the palace. Elira turned her attention back to Dravik. He was still unconscious, his breathing shallow, his pulse weak. But the flow of energy had stopped, and his shadow, though faint, was stable. She cradled his head in her lap, stroking his hair, whispering words of comfort, of love. She knew he was still in danger, that he needed medical attention, that they needed to escape the palace. But for now, all that mattered was that they were together, that they had survived, that they had shared the scars of their battle, both physical and emotional. They had faced the darkness, and they had emerged, wounded but not broken, their love a beacon of hope in the shadows. The scars remained, a reminder of the price they had paid, but also a testament to their strength, their resilience, and their enduring bond. They were no longer running, they were fighting. Chapter 15. The hidden library. Elira knew they couldn't stay in the palace. The queen was still at large, and her loyalists would be searching for them. They needed to find a safe haven, a place where Dravik could recover, and they could plan their next move. She remembered the stories she had heard as a child, whispers of a hidden library, a secret chamber deep beneath the palace, a place where ancient knowledge and forgotten magic were preserved. It was said to be protected by powerful enchantments, accessible only to those who knew the secret passages and the magical keys. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was their only hope. With Dravik still unconscious, Elira had to rely on her memory, her instincts, and the faint remnants of their connection to guide her. She navigated the labyrinthine tunnels, her senses heightened, alert for any sign of danger. The journey was arduous, a test of her strength and her resolve. She had to carry Dravik's weight, his limp body a constant reminder of the peril they faced. But she pressed on, driven by her love for him, by her determination to save him, to save the kingdom. She finally reached the entrance to the hidden library, a massive stone door, intricately carved with symbols and runes. She recognized the symbols from her childhood studies, ancient glyphs that represented knowledge, wisdom, and protection. But how to open it? She had no key, no magical artifact to unlock the door. Then, she remembered something Alaric had said, a cryptic phrase about the shadow's embrace being the key to unlocking hidden knowledge. She realized, with a jolt of understanding, that the key was not a physical object, but a magical one. It was her own ability, her shadow absorption, the very power that had saved them from the queen. She placed her hand on the door, focusing her will, her intent, on the ancient symbols. She reached out with her lack of a shadow, drawing in the ambient darkness of the tunnel, channeling it into the door. The symbols began to glow, a faint, ethereal light that pulsed with energy. The door creaked open, revealing a vast, circular chamber filled with towering bookshelves, ancient scrolls, and magical artifacts. The air hummed with power, with the weight of centuries of accumulated knowledge. It was a sanctuary, a place of refuge, a place of hope. Elira carried Dravik inside, laying him gently on a soft, velvet couch that seemed to have materialized out of thin air. She examined his wounds, her heart heavy with worry. He was still weak, still unconscious, but his breathing was more regular, his pulse stronger. She searched the library, her eyes scanning the shelves, the scrolls, the artifacts, looking for anything that could help him. She found ancient texts on healing magic, potions, and remedies. She found scrolls that described the properties of various herbs and minerals. She gathered the ingredients she needed, following the instructions in the texts, her hands trembling with urgency. She prepared a potion, a powerful concoction designed to counteract the queen's poison and restore Dravik's strength. She gently lifted his head, pouring the potion into his mouth, willing him to swallow, to respond. She waited, her heart in her throat, watching his face for any sign of change. Then, his eyelids fluttered open. He looked at her, his blue eyes filled with confusion, then with recognition, then with love. "Elira," he whispered, his voice weak but clear. "Dravik," she said, her voice choked with relief. "You're awake. You're alive." Tears streamed down her face, tears of joy, of gratitude, of overwhelming love. They were safe for now. They were together. And they had a fighting chance. The hidden library, a sanctuary of knowledge and magic, had given them a second chance, a renewed hope, a path forward. But the battle was far from over. The queen was still out there, and the Festival of Shadows was fast approaching. They had found refuge, but they still had to find a way to expose the queen, to save the king, to save the kingdom. And they would do it, together, armed with the knowledge and the power they had found in the shadows. Chapter 16. Prophecies unveiled. With Dravik awake and slowly recovering, they turned their attention to the task at hand, stopping the queen and saving the king. The Festival of Shadows was only days away, and they needed to act quickly. They spent hours poring over the ancient texts in the hidden library, searching for any information that could help them. They discovered forgotten prophecies, ancient spells, and hidden histories of Eredor. One scroll in particular caught their attention. It was an ancient prophecy written in a cryptic, symbolic language that spoke of a shadowless one who would rise to challenge the serpent in the royal garden and save the kingdom from darkness. Elyra realized, with a jolt of understanding, that the prophecy was about her. She was the shadowless one, destined to confront her own mother, the serpent, and prevent her from seizing the throne. The prophecy also spoke of a weapon of light, a magical artifact that could defeat the serpent's power. The weapon was described as a blade forged from the heart of a star, a blade that could cut through shadows and reveal the truth. But where was this weapon? The prophecy didn't say. They searched the library, their hopes rising and falling with each new discovery, each dead end. They found ancient swords, enchanted daggers, and powerful staffs, but none of them matched the description of the weapon of light. Then, Dravik stumbled upon a hidden chamber, a small, secret room behind a tapestry. Inside, they found a pedestal, and on the pedestal, a single object, a dagger. It wasn't just any dagger. It was a blade of pure, shimmering light, seemingly forged from starlight itself. It pulsed with energy, with a power that felt both ancient and alive. This was it, the weapon of light. Elyra reached out to touch it, and as her fingers brushed against the blade, a surge of energy flowed through her, a feeling of connection, of recognition. The blade seemed to know her, to respond to her touch. She realized that the weapon was not just a physical object, but a magical extension of herself, a tool that could amplify her own power, her ability to manipulate shadows. They had found the weapon, but they still needed a plan. How could they use it to expose the queen and prevent the assassination? They decided to use the Festival of Shadows itself as their stage. They would reveal the queen's treachery to the king, to the court, to the people, during the grand celebration. It was a risky plan, a dangerous gamble. The queen would be at the height of her power, surrounded by her loyalists, prepared to strike. But they had no other choice. They had to confront her, to expose her, to save the kingdom. They prepared for the confrontation, practicing their strategy, honing their skills. Dravik, though still weak, was determined to fight alongside Elyra, to protect her, to support her. They knew that the battle would be difficult, that they might not survive. But they were ready to face the darkness, to embrace their destiny, to fight for their love, for their kingdom, for their future. The prophecies had been unveiled, the weapon had been found, and the stage was set. The final confrontation was at hand. Chapter 17. The Queen's Conspiracy. The Festival of Shadows dawned, a day of vibrant celebration masking a sinister undercurrent. The capital city was alive with activity, the streets thronged with revelers, the air filled with music, laughter, and the tantalizing aroma of festival delicacies. But beneath the surface of the merriment, tension simmered. Elyra and Dravik could feel it, a palpable sense of unease that hung heavy in the air. They moved through the crowds, disguised as ordinary citizens, their faces hidden beneath hooded cloaks. They kept to the shadows, observing, waiting for the right moment to strike. They knew the queen's plan. She intended to assassinate the king during the climax of the festival, a grand spectacle of shadow magic performed in the royal plaza. She would use the chaos and confusion of the event to strike, to eliminate the king and seize control. Elyra and Dravik had to prevent that from happening. They had to expose the queen, to reveal her treachery to the king, to the court, to the people. They reached the royal plaza, a vast, open space surrounded by towering buildings and ornate balconies. The plaza was packed with spectators, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of torches and magical lanterns. The king and queen were seated on a raised platform, overlooking the crowd. King Theron looked frail, weakened by age and worry. Queen Lyra, in contrast, looked radiant, her eyes gleaming with a cold, calculating ambition. She was dressed in a gown of deep purple, her shadow swirling around her like a living cloak, a symbol of her power and her menace. The spectacle began. Shadow wielders from across the kingdom performed feats of magic, creating illusions, conjuring creatures of darkness, manipulating the shadows to create breathtaking displays of artistry and power. But Elyra and Dravik knew that this was just a prelude, a distraction from the queen's true purpose. As the spectacle reached its climax, a hush fell over the crowd. The queen rose from her seat, her shadow surging forward, engulfing the plaza in darkness. This was it, the moment of the assassination. Elyra and Dravik pushed their way through the crowd, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had to reach the king, to warn him, to protect him. But the queen's guards were everywhere, blocking their path, their swords drawn. "Stop them," the queen commanded, her voice echoing through the plaza. "They are traitors." A battle erupted in the heart of the festival. Dravik fought with his usual skill and power, his shadow a swirling vortex of darkness, deflecting blows, protecting Elyra. Elyra, wielding the dagger of light, fought with a newfound ferocity, her movements swift and precise. The blade pulsed with energy, cutting through the shadows, illuminating the darkness. They fought their way towards the royal platform, their determination fueled by their love, by their commitment to saving the kingdom. But the queen's forces were overwhelming. They were surrounded, outnumbered, outmatched. Then Elyra saw her chance. The queen, focused on Dravik, had left herself momentarily exposed. Elyra broke free from the melee, dodging swords, leaping over obstacles, her eyes fixed on her target. She reached the platform, the dagger of light raised high. "Mother!" she cried, her voice ringing through the plaza. "Stop this madness. Your plot is exposed." The queen turned, her eyes widening in surprise, then narrowing in fury. "You dare to defy me?" she hissed. "You, my shadowless daughter?" She unleashed a blast of dark energy, a wave of pure power aimed at Elyra. But Elyra was ready. She raised the dagger of light, and the blade absorbed the queen's attack, deflecting it harmlessly away. The crowd gasped, their eyes fixed on the confrontation between mother and daughter, between darkness and light. Elyra held the dagger aloft, and the blade began to glow, emitting a blinding light that illuminated the entire plaza. The light revealed the queen's shadow, not as a symbol of power, but as a manifestation of her treachery, her cruelty, her ambition. And within the queen's shadow, the light revealed something else. A series of images, flickering visions, that played out before the astonished eyes of the crowd. The images showed the queen's secret meetings with Lord Valerius, her coded messages, her plans to assassinate the king, her plot to seize the throne. The truth was revealed. The queen's conspiracy was exposed. The crowd erupted in outrage, their cheers turning to cries of anger, of betrayal. The king, stunned and heartbroken, stared at his wife, his queen, his betrayer. The queen's guards, realizing that they had been serving a traitor, lowered their swords, their loyalty shattered. The queen, her power broken, her plot exposed, stood alone, defeated, her shadow shrinking, fading, disappearing. The serpent had been vanquished. The kingdom was saved. Chapter 18. Flight and Pursuit. The revelation of Queen Lyra's treachery sent shockwaves through the court and the kingdom. The carefully constructed facade of unity and loyalty crumbled, replaced by chaos, disbelief, and outrage. King Theron, heartbroken and betrayed, ordered the queen's immediate arrest, but it was too late. Lyra, seeing her meticulously crafted plan unravel, had anticipated this moment. Before the stunned guards could react, she unleashed a final, desperate burst of shadow magic, creating a blinding flash of darkness that enveloped the royal platform. When the darkness receded, she was gone. Lyra and Dravik, though exhausted from the battle, immediately understood the implications. The queen had escaped, and she would not go quietly. She was still a powerful shadow wielder, driven by a ruthless ambition and a burning desire for revenge. "She'll flee the city," Dravik said, his voice grim. "She'll try to reach her allies, to regroup and strike again." They had to stop her. They had to prevent her from escaping, from gathering her forces, from plunging the kingdom into another, even more devastating conflict. They left the royal plaza, pushing their way through the bewildered crowds, their minds racing. They needed to find a way to track the queen, to anticipate her next move. They knew that the queen's most likely destination would be her ancestral estate, a remote fortress located in the treacherous Shadowlands, a region known for its dangerous terrain and its powerful, uncontrolled magic. It was a place where she could hide, regroup, and potentially rally support from disgruntled nobles who still harbored resentment towards the crown. They decided to pursue her, to follow her into the Shadowlands, to confront her and end her threat once and for all. But they knew it would be a perilous journey, a test of their strength, their skills, and their love. They slipped out of the city, avoiding the main roads, keeping to the shadows. They moved swiftly, silently, their senses heightened, alert for any sign of pursuit. But the queen had anticipated their pursuit. She had left behind a trail of traps, obstacles, and loyalists, determined to slow them down, to deter them, to kill them. They faced ambushes from hidden assassins, magical snares that sprang from the shadows, and treacherous terrain that threatened to swallow them whole. But they persevered, their determination fueled by their love for each other, by their commitment to saving the kingdom. Dravik used his shadow magic to protect them, to deflect attacks, to clear paths. Lyra used her shadow absorption and the dagger of light to counter the queen's magic, to illuminate the darkness, to reveal hidden dangers. They fought side by side, their skills complementing each other, their bond strengthening with each challenge they overcame. They were a force to be reckoned with, a team forged in the crucible of love and adversity. But the queen was always one step ahead, her cunning and her ruthlessness a constant threat. She knew the terrain, she knew their weaknesses, and she exploited them mercilessly. As they journeyed deeper into the Shadowlands, the landscape grew more desolate, more dangerous. The air was thick with magic, and the shadows seemed to writhe with a life of their own. They were entering the queen's domain, a place where her power was amplified, where her darkness reigned supreme. The pursuit was relentless, a cat-and-mouse game played out across a landscape of shadows and peril. They were tired, wounded, but they would not give up. They would not rest until they had stopped the queen, until they had secured the future of their kingdom, until they had secured their future together. They would follow her to the ends of Eredor, if necessary. They would face any danger, overcome any obstacle, to protect their love, their kingdom, their destiny. The flight and pursuit had begun, and the fate of Eredor hung in the balance. Chapter 19, Sanctuary of Secrets. The relentless pursuit through the Shadowlands had taken its toll. Lyra and Dravik were exhausted, wounded, and their supplies were dwindling. The queen's traps and ambushes had been relentless, pushing them to their limits. They needed respite, a place to regroup and recover before continuing their chase. As they traversed a particularly treacherous stretch of terrain, a dense forest shrouded in an unnatural twilight, Lyra stumbled, her strength failing. Dravik caught her, his concern evident in his eyes. "We need to rest, Lyra," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "We can't go on like this." She knew he was right, but the urgency of their mission pressed upon her. The queen was still out there, growing stronger with each passing hour. "But the queen," she began, her voice weak. "The queen will still be there," Dravik interrupted. We're no use to anyone if we collapse from exhaustion. He scanned their surroundings, searching for a safe haven. The forest was dense, the trees ancient and gnarled, their branches intertwined, blocking out most of the light. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Then he saw it. A faint glimmer of light, hidden deep within the trees, a flicker of warmth that seemed to beckon them. They moved towards the light, their hopes rising. As they drew closer, they saw that it was emanating from a small clearing, bathed in an ethereal glow. In the center of the clearing stood a circle of ancient standing stones, surrounding a small, crystal-clear pool of water. It was a sanctuary, a place of peace and tranquility, hidden deep within the heart of the Shadowlands. As they entered the clearing, they felt a sense of calm wash over them, a feeling of protection, of welcome. The air was lighter here, fresher, and the shadows seemed to recede, as if held at bay by an unseen force. They realized that this was no ordinary place. It was a place of ancient magic, a sanctuary protected by powerful enchantments. As they approached the pool, a figure emerged from the shadows, an old woman with long, flowing white hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. She wore a simple robe, and her face was etched with wisdom and compassion. "Welcome, travelers," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I am Lyria, guardian of the sanctuary." Lyra and Dravik were surprised, but also relieved. They had stumbled upon a place of refuge, a place where they could find help. They explained their situation, their pursuit of the queen, their need for rest and healing. Lyria listened intently, her eyes filled with understanding. "The Shadowlands are a dangerous place," she said, "and the queen is a formidable foe. You are fortunate to have found your way here." She offered them food and shelter, and tended to their wounds, using her knowledge of ancient herbs and healing magic. She was a skilled healer, and her touch brought immediate relief. As they rested, Lyria told them about the sanctuary. It was an ancient place, she explained, a refuge for those who sought knowledge and understanding of the Shadowlands. It was protected by powerful enchantments, making it invisible to those who did not know the secret paths. She also revealed that she knew about Iliara's shadowless nature and about her connection to Dravik. "You are both touched by destiny," she said. "You have a great power within you, a power that can either save the kingdom or destroy it." She offered to help them, to guide them, to teach them how to control their powers, how to harness the energy of the Shadowlands. They gratefully accepted her offer. They spent several days in the sanctuary, resting, recovering, and learning from Lyria. She taught them about the ancient magic of the Shadowlands, about the balance between light and darkness, about the power of their connection. She helped Lyra to understand her shadow absorption, to control it, to use it not just as a weapon, but as a tool for healing, for protection, for understanding. She helped Dravik to master his shadow magic, to channel it, to control its destructive potential, to use it for good. The sanctuary was a place of learning, of growth, of transformation. It was a place where they could hone their skills, strengthen their bond, and prepare for the final confrontation with the queen. But their time in the sanctuary was limited. The queen was still out there, and the fate of the kingdom hung in the balance. They had to leave, to continue their pursuit, to face their destiny. But they would leave stronger, wiser, and more prepared than ever before, their love a beacon of hope in the darkness, their powers a force to be reckoned with. The Sanctuary of Secrets had given them the strength and the knowledge they needed to face the final battle. Chapter 20. The Heart of Darkness. Leaving the sanctuary, Lyra and Dravik felt a renewed sense of purpose. Lyria's guidance had been invaluable, honing their skills and deepening their understanding of their powers and the nature of the Shadowlands. They were ready to face the queen, but they knew they needed a plan. They continued their journey towards the queen's ancestral estate, a fortress known as Shadowfell, nestled deep within the most treacherous part of the Shadowlands. The landscape grew increasingly bleak, the shadows deeper and more menacing, the air thick with a palpable sense of dread. As they approached Shadowfell, Dravik began to experience a growing unease, a sense of familiarity that tugged at the edges of his memory. He realized that he had been here before, as a child, brought by his father on a visit to the queen, who was a distant relative. He remembered the fortress as a cold, imposing place, filled with dark secrets and whispered rumors. He remembered the queen, even then, as a figure of power and fear, her shadow a constant, unsettling presence. He shared his memories with Elira, warning her of the dangers that lay ahead. Shadowfell was not just a fortress, it was a nexus of dark magic, a place where the queen's power would be amplified, where her control over the shadows would be absolute. They decided to approach the fortress cautiously, using their combined skills to scout the area, to assess the defenses, to identify any weaknesses. They discovered that Shadowfell was heavily guarded, not just by human soldiers, but by creatures of shadow, monstrous beings conjured by the queen's magic. The fortress was surrounded by a network of magical traps and wards designed to deter intruders, to kill them, to drive them mad. They knew that a direct assault would be suicidal. They needed to find a way to infiltrate the fortress, to bypass the defenses, to reach the queen without alerting her to their presence. Dravik remembered a secret passage, a hidden tunnel that led from the nearby mountains into the heart of the fortress. It was a dangerous route, filled with treacherous pitfalls and forgotten creatures, but it was their best chance. They entered the tunnel, their hearts pounding with apprehension. The air was cold and damp, and the darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint glow of Iliara's dagger of light. As they navigated the tunnel, they encountered a series of challenges, obstacles that tested their skills, their courage, and their bond. They faced swarms of shadow creatures, magical traps that sprung from the darkness, and treacherous passages that threatened to collapse around them. But they persevered, their love for each other, their commitment to their mission, driving them forward. They worked together, their powers complementing each other, their connection a source of strength and resilience. Then, Dravik was confronted by a different kind of challenge. A memory, a vision, a haunting echo of his past. He saw himself as a child, standing before the queen in the heart of Shadowfell. He saw the queen's power, her cruelty, her ambition. He saw the fear in his own eyes, the shame he felt at his own weakness, at his inability to control his shadow. The queen had tried to manipulate him, to mold him into a weapon, a tool for her own purposes. She had exploited his fears, his insecurities, his vulnerabilities. He realized that the queen had been playing this game for a long time, manipulating not just him, but his father, his family, the entire kingdom. She had been weaving a web of darkness, slowly but surely, drawing everyone into her orbit. This realization fueled his rage, his determination to stop her, to break her hold on him, on his family, on the kingdom. He shared his vision with Elira, his voice filled with anguish and anger. She listened, her heart aching for him, her own resolve strengthening. They had to stop the queen, not just for the kingdom, but for themselves, for their future, for the chance to break free from the shadows of the past. They emerged from the tunnel, into the heart of Shadowfell, the very heart of darkness. The queen was waiting for them. Chapter 21. The Shadow's Choice. They emerged into a vast, cavernous chamber, the heart of Shadowfell. The air was thick with the stench of decay and the chilling presence of dark magic. Torches flickered along the walls, casting eerie shadows that danced and writhed like living things. And in the center of the chamber, seated on a throne carved from obsidian, was Queen Lyra. She was even more formidable than Elira remembered. Her eyes blazed with a cold, malevolent power, and her shadow was a swirling vortex of darkness that seemed to consume the very light around her. She was surrounded by her elite guard, their faces masked, their weapons drawn, their loyalty absolute. "Welcome, children," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I have been expecting you." Elira and Dravik stood their ground, their hands clasped tightly together, their bond a source of strength and courage. "It's over, Mother," Elira said, her voice firm and clear. "Your plot is exposed. Your reign of terror ends here." The queen laughed, a cold, cruel sound that echoed through the chamber. You think you can defeat me? You, a shadowless weakling, and you, a traitorous dog? She gestured towards Dravik, her eyes filled with contempt. You were meant to be my weapon, my tool. But you have chosen to betray me, to side with this aberration. Dravik stepped forward, his jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with defiance. I am not your weapon, he said, his voice ringing with authority. I am my own man, and I choose to stand with Elyra, with love, with the light. The queen's smile widened, a chilling expression of amusement. Love? You think love can conquer power? You are both fools. She raised her hand, and the chamber plunged into absolute darkness. The torches were extinguished, and the only source of light was the faint, ethereal glow of Elyra's dagger. Let us see how strong your love is, the queen hissed, her voice echoing through the darkness. Let us see if it can survive the shadows. A battle erupted in the heart of darkness. The queen's guards attacked, their shadowy forms merging with the darkness, their movements swift and deadly. Dravik fought with the fury of a cornered wolf, his shadow a swirling vortex of defense and attack. He moved with a grace and power that belied his recent injuries, his determination fueled by his love for Elyra and his hatred for the queen. Elyra, wielding the dagger of light, fought with a newfound confidence, her movements fluid and precise. The blade cut through the shadows, illuminating the darkness, revealing the queen's forces, disrupting their attacks. But the queen was the true threat. She was a master of shadow magic, and her power was amplified by the dark energy of Shadowfell. She unleashed waves of darkness, conjuring monstrous creatures, manipulating the shadows to attack, to ensnare, to crush. Elyra knew that they couldn't defeat the queen with brute force. They needed to find a way to exploit her weakness, to use her own power against her. She remembered Lyria's words about the balance between light and darkness, about the power of choice. She realized that the queen's true weakness was not her lack of light, but her refusal to embrace it. She had chosen darkness, she had embraced her shadow, but she had rejected the light, the love, the compassion that could have balanced her power. Elyra made a choice. A daring, dangerous choice that could either save them or destroy them. She lowered the dagger of light, extinguishing its glow. The chamber plunged back into absolute darkness. Elyra! Dravik cried, his voice filled with alarm. What are you doing? Trust me, she whispered, her voice filled with conviction. She focused her will, her intent, on the queen, on her shadow, on the darkness that surrounded them. She reached out with her lack of a shadow, not to absorb, not to attack, but to connect. She offered the queen a choice. A chance to embrace the light, to find redemption, to break free from the darkness that consumed her. It was a moment of profound vulnerability, a moment of pure, unconditional love. The queen hesitated, her shadow flickering, her power wavering. She felt Elyra's presence, her offer, her love. For a moment, the darkness seemed to recede, a flicker of light appearing in the queen's eyes. But then, her ambition, her hatred, her fear, reasserted themselves. She rejected Elyra's offer. She clung to her darkness. She chose to remain the serpent. No, she shrieked. I will not be defeated. I will not be controlled. She unleashed a final, desperate blast of shadow energy, a wave of pure darkness aimed at Elyra, at Dravik, at everything. Elyra, prepared for this, raised her hand, not to deflect, not to absorb, but to accept. She took the full force of the queen's attack, channeling it, redirecting it, not back at the queen, but into the very foundations of Shadowfell. The fortress began to tremble, to crack, to crumble. The dark magic that sustained it was collapsing, the shadows receding, the light returning. The queen screamed in rage and despair as her power was consumed, her fortress destroyed, her reign of terror ended. Elyra had made her choice. The shadow's choice. And it had saved them all. Chapter 22. Dawn of rebellion, the collapse of Shadowfell, was cataclysmic. The ancient fortress, steeped in dark magic for centuries, crumbled into dust, its power dissipating into the Shadowlands. The Queen's elite guard, their loyalty shattered by their mistress's defeat and the destruction of her stronghold, scattered and fled. Elyra and Dravik, weakened but alive, emerged from the ruins, their clothes torn, their bodies bruised, but their spirits unbroken. They had faced the heart of darkness and emerged victorious, their love a beacon of hope in the shadows. But the battle was not over. The Queen, though defeated and stripped of her fortress, had escaped. She was still a powerful shadow wielder, and her ambition, her hatred, her desire for revenge would not be easily extinguished. They knew they had to return to the capital, to warn the king, to rally the loyal forces, to prepare for the Queen's inevitable counterattack. They began the long journey back, their bodies weary, their minds racing. They knew that time was of the essence. The Queen would be seeking allies, gathering her strength, plotting her next move. As they traveled, they discussed their strategy, weighing their options. They knew they couldn't face the Queen alone. They needed help, support, an army to stand against her. They decided to rally the loyal nobles, the ones who had remained true to the crown, the ones who had opposed the Queen's treachery. They would send messages, secret missives, calling on them to assemble, to prepare for war. But they also knew that they needed something more, something to inspire the people, to unite them against the Queen, to give them hope. They needed a symbol, a banner, a rallying cry. Elyra remembered the prophecy, the Shadowless one who would rise to challenge the serpent and save the kingdom. She realized that she was that symbol, that she was the one who could unite the people, who could inspire them to fight for their freedom. She decided to embrace her destiny, to step out of the shadows, to reveal her power, to become the leader she was meant to be. When they finally reached a loyal city, still reeling from word trickling out of the capital, they did not sneak through shadows, but approached openly. They were met with wary skepticism. "I am Elyra, Princess of Eredor," she declared to the assembled guards, her voice ringing with authority, "and I ask for entry and an audience with the ranking noble." The guards' captain, a grizzled veteran with a scarred face, studied them for a long moment, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "The princess is betrothed to the Shadow Lord," the captain stated, his voice gruff, "and last we heard, both are traitors." Elyra stepped forward. "We have uncovered a plot," she announced, holding up the dagger, though not igniting it. "A plot by Queen Lyra to usurp the throne. She has been manipulating the court, with Valerius merely a pawn. She attempted to assassinate the king and fled into the Shadowlands when she failed." "Prove it," the captain challenged. Elyra drew upon her power and Dravik's, and with their combined strength, she showed the captain and the guards the truth. She projected images into their minds of the Queen's meeting, the messages, her attack, her escape. "We have traveled long to bring this warning. I am the Shadowless, one of prophecy. He is Dravik, the Shadow Lord and my love. We are here to free Eredor." The captain knelt. Word spread like wildfire. The Shadowless princess, the prophesied savior, had returned, and she had brought with her the truth, the hope, the promise of rebellion. Nobles from across the kingdom, those who had remained loyal to the crown, those who had grown disillusioned with the Queen's rule, flocked to Elyra's banner. They pledged their swords, their lives, their loyalty to her cause. An army was assembled, a force of light and shadow, united against the Queen's darkness. Elyra, the Shadowless princess, became the leader of the rebellion, her courage, her compassion, her power inspiring her followers. Dravik, the Shadow Lord, stood by her side, his strength, his loyalty, his love, her unwavering support. They prepared for war, knowing that the final confrontation with the Queen was inevitable. But they were no longer afraid. They were united, they were strong, and they were ready to fight for their kingdom, for their love, for their future. The dawn of rebellion had arrived, and the shadows were about to be vanquished. Chapter 23. The final confrontation took place on the plains outside the capital city, a vast, open expanse where the fate of Eredor would be decided. The rebel army, led by Elira and Dravik, faced the Queen's forces, a smaller but still formidable army of loyalists, mercenaries, and creatures of shadow. The two armies clashed, a storm of steel and shadow, a battle between light and darkness, between love and hate, between freedom and tyranny. Elira, wielding the dagger of light, rode at the head of her troops, her presence a beacon of hope, her power a force to be reckoned with. She fought with a courage and a skill that belied her years, her movements fluid and precise, her shadow absorption deflecting attacks, her blade cutting through the darkness. Dravik, fighting by her side, was a whirlwind of destruction, his shadow a swirling vortex of power that consumed his enemies. He fought with the fury of a cornered wolf, his love for Elira, his loyalty to the kingdom, his hatred for the Queen fueling his every move. The battle raged, a chaotic melee of clashing swords, screaming soldiers, and roaring shadows. The ground was soaked with blood, the air filled with the cries of the wounded and the dying. But Elira and Dravik were not alone. They were surrounded by allies, by loyal friends and brave soldiers who believed in their cause, who were willing to fight and die for the freedom of Eredor. The tide of the battle began to turn. The rebel army, inspired by Elira's leadership and Dravik's strength, pushed back the Queen's forces, driving them towards the city gates. But the Queen was not defeated. She was still a powerful shadow wielder, and she had one last card to play. She unleashed a wave of dark magic, a storm of shadows that swept across the battlefield, engulfing everything in darkness. The rebel soldiers cried out in fear, their courage faltering, their formations breaking. Elira knew that this was the Queen's final gambit, her last desperate attempt to seize victory. She had to do something, she had to stop her. She focused her will, her intent, on the dagger of light. She reached out with her lack of a shadow, drawing in not just the ambient darkness, but also Dravik's shadow, their connection a conduit of power. The dagger began to glow, emitting a blinding light that pierced through the darkness, illuminating the battlefield, revealing the Queen's forces, dispelling their fear. And then, Elira unleashed the full power of the blade, a wave of pure light that swept across the battlefield, consuming the Queen's shadows, driving back her forces, shattering her magic. The Queen screamed in rage and despair as her power was broken, her army routed, her reign of terror ended. She stood alone, defeated, her shadow flickering, fading, disappearing. Elira approached her, the dagger of light held high. She could have killed her, ended her life with a single blow. But she didn't. She lowered the blade, her eyes filled with compassion, with pity, with a profound sadness. "It's over, Mother," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Your reign of darkness is ended." The Queen looked at her, her eyes filled with hatred, with bitterness, with a flicker of something that might have been regret. Then, she closed her eyes, and her shadow vanished completely. She collapsed to the ground, not dead, but empty. Her power was gone, her spirit broken, her ambition extinguished. The battle was over. The war was won. The rebel army cheered, their voices echoing across the plains, a triumphant cry of victory, of freedom, of hope. Elira and Dravik, standing side by side, their hands clasped tightly together, looked out at the cheering crowds, their hearts filled with gratitude, with relief, with love. They had faced the darkness, and they had emerged victorious. They had saved the kingdom, they had secured their future, and they had proven that love, compassion, and courage could conquer even the most powerful shadows. The final shadow had been vanquished, and a new dawn had risen over Eredor. Epilogue. A kingdom united. The months following the Queen's defeat were a time of healing, rebuilding, and reconciliation. The kingdom, scarred by years of oppression and conflict, slowly began to recover. The wounds of the past, both physical and emotional, began to heal, replaced by a sense of hope, of unity, of a brighter future. King Theron, heartbroken by his wife's treachery but relieved by the kingdom's salvation, abdicated the throne, recognizing his own weakness and the need for new leadership. He named Elira as his successor, acknowledging her courage, her compassion, her power, and her right to rule. Elira, the Shadowless princess, once considered a liability, an outcast, became Queen Elira, the savior of Eredor, the leader of a new era. She ascended the throne with Dravok by her side, their love a symbol of hope, of unity, of a strength that could be found in embracing both light and shadow. They ruled together, not as king and queen, but as partners, as equals, their combined wisdom and strength guiding the kingdom towards a future of peace and prosperity. They abolished the old, oppressive laws, reformed the court, and established a new council composed of representatives from all corners of the kingdom, regardless of their shadow abilities. They fostered a culture of acceptance, of understanding, of celebrating differences. They recognized that true strength lay not in conformity, but in diversity, in the unique talents and abilities of every individual. They also established a new order of magic wielders, an academy where those with shadow abilities could learn to control their powers, to use them for good, to serve the kingdom, not to dominate it. Elira, with her unique ability to manipulate shadows, and Dravok, with his mastery of shadow magic, became the mentors, the teachers, the guides for a new generation of magic wielders. The kingdom flourished under their rule. The economy prospered, the arts thrived, and the people rejoiced. Eredor, once a land of shadows and fear, became a land of light and hope. Elira and Dravok, despite their royal duties, found time for each other, for their love. They often returned to the hidden library, their sanctuary, their place of refuge, to renew their bond, to remember the challenges they had overcome, to reaffirm their commitment to each other and to their kingdom. One evening, as they stood together in the library, surrounded by ancient texts and magical artifacts, Dravok turned to Elira, his eyes filled with love and admiration. "You have done it, Elira," he said, his voice soft. "You have saved the kingdom. You have brought light to the shadows." Elira smiled, her heart overflowing with happiness. "We did it together, Dravok," she said. "We faced the darkness, and we emerged stronger, our love a beacon of hope for all." She leaned in and kissed him, a tender, loving kiss that sealed their bond, their love, their destiny. They were no longer just a princess and a lord, bound by a political arrangement. They were not just shadowless, or all shadow. They were partners, lovers, rulers, united by a love that had conquered all, a love that had brought light to the shadows, a love that had saved a kingdom. They were Elira and Dravok, the queen and her shadow lord, and their reign had just begun. A kingdom united, a future bright, a love eternal. The shadows had been embraced, and the light had prevailed. They spent their remaining years ruling justly, and were eventually succeeded by children who bore both of their parents' traits.